presentations earlier. I'm a political scientist, as was announced earlier, so I have a very different understanding. And there is already literature on the politics of corporate social responsibility, so that is not new. But what I would like to bring is a kind of fresh perspective, I hope. But this is a very preliminary paper, and I'm just beginning to do this work, so you'll bear with me on the elementary level of presentation. All the discussions around CSR so far focus on what a company ought to do with its profits, the profits that it generates. The ideas range from working with the underprivileged, as we've seen, to saving the environment. There's a spectrum. While these are very valuable, no question, my disciplinary training persuades me to look at this question somewhat differently. I will unpack the idea of CSR from the perspective of politics. Politics, I must clarify, there are so many notions of what politics is, and mostly negative. I would like to bring here to this discussion that politics is fundamentally, at the level of a study of power and contestations around it. And in practice, politics is a very creative, enabling process of transforming the world around us. In that sense, there is nothing that is outside the arena of politics, and so we bring the idea of politics to that of CSR as well. What my discipline teaches me, more so, a political understanding teaches me that there are no givens, actually. Everything that we have created, after all the concepts, ideas, practices we work with, we've created. We are now in an age when we don't say that something came from the divine. If we run a company, it's something that we created. If we have a profit motive, it's something we've created. So, therefore, everything that we have created, we can challenge, we can question. Everything is questionable. And everything has an alternative. And that is the spirit in which we need to look at the idea of CSR itself, while we are all engaged in making it a better concept to be practiced. We all agree that it's a very good idea. How it can work is what it needs to be looked at, but I'm also saying that the idea itself can be constructed differently. The basic argument, therefore, I want to make is that we need to talk about CSR at the very preliminary stage of production and manufacturing of any firm. In the dominant CSR literature, from what I've seen of it, all discussion of CSR begins once the production is undertaken and the profits made by the firm are in place. While this is very important, it serves to locate the responsibility of the firm to society after its responsibility to itself and its stakeholders is complete. Even when we know that even when the definition of stakeholders seems to be very large, we know that by and large the focus is on the shareholder rather than the stakeholder. And therefore, I would argue that CSR needs to be pitched for the firm to fulfill its interests together with its responsibility to society, not after its own responsibility is over. Let me explain in an outline, and only an outline is possible in such a short time. We know that the cornerstone of production for all companies is their technological base, and this base has been developed since the onset of the Industrial Revolution a couple of centuries ago in Europe. Newer and newer technologies emerge every day to make work faster, more mechanized, and accessible to larger markets worldwide. While this has been happening, all kinds of fallouts of this technological change have been experienced. Positive, people have become more prosperous, lives have become easier, the world has become smaller. So historically, the modern firm has been the harbinger of progress, of development, a model, an idea that we have willingly embraced all over the world. Yet, we also know that there are at least two sides of power that have governed this model of development, of production. The first is our understanding of nature and its resources, with the use of production that has given us a very skewed worldview. Willy-nilly, we have instituted a process of plunder of nature that threatens the very base, the existence of the large industrial complex that we have built worldwide. This goes together with the byproducts of industrial production, like toxic wastes, which are a problem we actually quite do not know how to deal with. This is why a lot of CSR work now, for a couple of decades, if not more, is focused on companies trying to make amends on the environmental front, and we've seen how many of the presentations focused on questions of the environment. I believe, though, that if the CSR steps were to be advanced to the drawing board stage and linked to the very technological process, the production base that yields the output as well as the wastes, the pollution and so on that have been referred to. And the focus of CSR becomes to amend, if necessary, alter the very techniques that necessitate the large-scale use of limited natural resources. Then they would be much more successful. The history of innovations that yielded the technologies that had this orientation is the product of a human mind. We have to remember that these technologies we produced, Bhagwan ka diya hua nahi hai. We produced them, and so fortunately they are in our hands, we can change them. So if it requires radical change in the light of what difficulties we have encountered, then the same human mind would be able to innovate on the alternatives. And indeed, many companies worldwide are pursuing alternatives, greener technologies. So this part is partially already in practice, but what needs to be done is much more than what is available at the moment. Excuse me. But together with the development, and what is the much more that needs to be done is what I want to spell out, together with the development of new greener technologies of production. Not hold out against these technologies and the goods dumped on them, because they themselves are dominated by the idea of, and the power of the idea of development. Because development means getting new technologies, even if they are outdated in the West. Hamare yahan to nahi hai. So let us get them, even the outdated products. And we are so keen to identify the prestige of modern technology that often we forget that if they are outdated in the West, there must be a very good reason, and can we withstand that? That's a very difficult choice for us, and it's a political choice. This is why my discipline enables us to understand this whole issue much better. Therefore, the idea is, of acquiring new technologies which are seen to be more advanced. This is something that we need to question. Further, large companies have been unable or unwilling. This is the second aspect, which I think is very important about these new companies that do invest in green technologies. But the proportion of their investment in green technologies to the proportion of investment in very traditional technologies, the research and development for traditional technologies, is still very low. And the reason for this is that they are all caught up in a vortex of power structures around certain natural resources that have fueled the engines of modern development. So since oil guides so much of modern technology, the fact that we need to think out of the box where oil is concerned and the entire politics of oil at an international level, that has not happened at all. It's just not a small, but a passing example, and much more can be said on this, but there's no time here to talk about that. So what has happened as a result is that there's a polarization of the debate on technology and the environment. Some of us who are interested in that, we know that either you have good technology or you can save the environment. To do the in-between requires the same level of research and development that went into the Industrial Revolution. And that the big companies are still not prepared to do, and I feel that is the responsibility that they need to fulfill first of all. The second point, and I'm very conscious that I should not take more time, is the perspective of human labor, which is involved in modern production. While the last century has seen tremendous progress in labor relations and the improvement of the working conditions of labor, it is important to remember that this has really happened in one part of the world, and in the poorer part of the world where it's happened for a very small proportion of the population. Most of them, in fact, what has happened, I believe, that the deepening exploitation of labor in the poorer parts of the world is a result of a process by which there's flexible specialization, expansion of capital around the world. That is what we know as globalization. But then that very globalization is predicated on very unequal labor relations, the kind of labor relations that would never be acceptable in the so-called developed parts of the world. So there is a huge paradox here, and there's a sense of irresponsibility here on the part of corporates, which we really need to identify, and which we need to say is something where the corporates should start. So therefore, this is at the level of production, the technology and labor management. That's where the responsibility really needs to start. And if they come, and I believe that a lot of corporates are extremely sensitive and aware of this dimension of their work. It's something that they can work with. I think that they would be fulfilling a very significant aspect of their corporate social responsibility. This might, as a political scientist, this seems to me the most important point of entry into understanding CSR. It may seem out of the box, which it is intended to be. It may seem unusual or even utopian to those who may not be, within this language of power. But we all know that even, in the 16th century, the 17th century, the Industrial Revolution would have seemed like a utopia. And it is human civilization that enabled the fulfillment of that utopia. So utopia is a very good starting point to think about the future. And I would urge that this conference be at least a site where we are able to do it. Thank you.
I'm Sanjay Mohanty. I teach political science in Shamdal College evening. My question and few observations, 2-3 lines, specifically to Madhurika ma'am.
Can I restrict you to your question? The observations we'll discuss later.
Because I have a completely different take on the issue.
Single line question.
Single line question then.
Ask
Okay,
the
single line question. Single line question. Ma'am, don't you think this CSR is just like an ideal, just like Gandhism or communism, which can be professed, but it's very difficult, almost impossible to practice. Just one example, second sentence only. For example, we talk about CSR by different companies, Coca-Cola, or so many companies. But what about the Coca-Cola or any companies, corporates, those who manufacture defense products, I would call offense products, soft drinks, tobacco, firearms, alcohol products, and we say, okay, they are following CSR. It is completely paradoxical, shallow, and very superficial CSR, what I feel. This is just an ethical, which can just be dreamed of, but which cannot be practiced ever. Thank you, ma'am.
Can I suggest that we take questions first and then we'll do the answers? Instead of one question per, that will take too long. His hand went up first, so may I ask him? Please introduce yourself.
Myself, Balram Rao from ICU. Ma'am, as you rightly pointed out, being a utopian kind of a situation where industrialization was here in 1990 itself after World War. But there is a difference now. How you just relate to industrialization, now it's going to discuss about labor relation as CSR is concerned. Because CSR is more inclined towards labor relation, not industrial relation. Because in words of Commons itself, we studied the Chicago School, what he say, I am here to protect the capitalism through industrial relations. But labor relation is not that, to protect the capitalism. It's again the humanitarian ground where you say it's human labor relation. How you just differentiate between two terms, industrial relation and labor relation?
Okay.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Momita. I'm from FMS Delhi University. My question is for Professor Sharma. Sir?
I'm noting other questions also.
Right. So CSR is believed that companies doesn't do CSR unless forced to do so. Do you think it's the right belief? And if it is so, and that's the reason for mandatory CSR spending, and if it is so, how to look forward for ethical performance or ethical business conduct? Because it's believed that responsible business has to be ethical. So that's the question.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael Hopkins. Very quick question. Do you think, do the panel members think that the tax on corporate profits towards CSR activities will encourage or discourage CSR?
Actually, given the time limit that I have been assigned, maybe we should try to answer the questions. And
yeah, should I start?
Please.
Yeah, please. First from Professor.
On.
Yeah, your query is a tax. Is it a tax? Will discourage if it is a tax. It is not a tax. It is not a levy. It is a expenditure or spending, which the corporates of certain size, they have been, I can't say it is mandatory, they have been asked to ensure, the bodies ensure that this much of amount is spent on CSR activities. So it is out of the profit and loss account, there is a profit, there are expenses, and then is a net profit or loss. So it is one of the expenses, So the company, is to ensure that minimum 2% of, or net profit of the net profit is spent on CSR activities. So it will not be credited in the government account. It will not be charged by the government or IT departments. Right? So it is a spending. That is my observation on your question. And then there was a query from that side. That is whether the corporates, they will be forced to. Is it the query?
Yeah.
No, it is not mandatory. But indirectly it is mandatory. As per, if you go to the provisions of the law or the act, the body is ensured. The body is not mandatory. But if the companies, they have to explain and give reason. And if the corporates, they are not able to satisfy the regulators, then there is a penalty ranging from minimum 50,000 up to 25 lakh rupees, though there is no imprisonment provision. So that is now there is another angle of looking into this problem. As you referred to, on ethical conduct part also, if you go into the history of CSR or the corporate governance, which is the another angle, both are complementary. You analyze any corporate failure around the world, starting from Maxwell Communication 91 up to that company IT Satyam. There are certain common problems which I have noticed. I have studied 34 corporate scams around the world. And one of the most common problems which I have noticed is unethical conduct on the part of the management. Unethical conduct on the part of the management. So even in Satyam, out of the 9 members of the board, 6 were independent. What were they doing? That 2 of the independent directors on the board were eminent people, eminent professors from Harvard. Mangalam Srinivasan, that lady since 91.